All right, the last piece to really fall into place in Darwin's head is the work done by a man named Thomas Malthus. Malthus was another Englishman, but instead of being a naturalist, he was actually a economist. Studied populations and food supply and stuff. And what he kind of came to understand is that at this time period in Britain, the population was beginning to increase very, very quickly, almost exponentially. If you look at this graph here, the population of people was the red line here. The rub is, the blue line was Britain's food supply, how much they were able to produce each year. And he was worried that they'd eventually hit a point where the population would grow to a point where the food supply would be too small to feed everyone. And this would cause unrest, because people who everyone needs food. In response to this, because of the demand for food, food prices would likely go up. And because there'd be wealthier people in the in England, they'd be able to buy food, they'd be fine. But the poor people who wouldn't be able to buy the food at a higher cost, they wouldn't just die or go noiselessly into the night. They would fight for survival. They would struggle. They might resort to crime, stealing, to be able to feed their families. So he was really worried that the lack of food would just cause this societal breakdown where everyone would be struggling to feed their own families. And this idea goes into Darwin's head and also jumbles around with the idea that different animals seem to be related, and that it does appear that things have been changing over time. And what Darwin does is he stitches all of these ideas together into one cohesive idea. And he does this when he publishes his book called On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection in 1859. Where he proposes that animals, living things, they change over time, but drastically changes that method which Lamarck had to something that actually fit and made sense with how things actually work. So he did say that natural selection itself has a few conditions that are necessary for it to actually work. The first condition is variations must exist in every population due to random mutations. If you look around people, for instance, we all have very different traits. We all look different. We all have different abilities or heights or other things. Those things, they provide variation. Next thing, these variations must be inheritable. For instance, my eye color, I mentioned about that before. That is a trait that's inheritable. That can cause natural selection or be a part of it. Third condition, species must be able to create more individuals than their through reproduction that could survive in that environment. Now, people, we're not the slowest at reproduction out there, but we're not the fastest either. And if you think about the families that have the most kids, you might be thinking like 5 or 6 kids maybe in your own personal experience, but there's that Duggar family that has like 20-some kids at this point. 20, I think, is the exact number. Just imagine if everyone in the world had 20 children. We would be so overpopulated at that point. It'd be insane. So we are definitely able to produce more people than can survive in an environment. And other animals that breed much quicker than we can also do that too. But that must be a condition that can happen for a species to undergo natural selection. And finally, the environment must also pose some kind of challenge to survive. And if those 4 conditions are met, then we get into natural selection. Natural selection is the theory which states that individuals that have advantageous variations will survive and reproduce more effectively, while individuals with negative variations will struggle to survive and reproduce. This makes sense, and because of the way natural selection works, these positive traits, these advantageous variations, they become more and more and more common as we go through generations of individuals, generations of species. And over generations, these advantages uh, represent a larger and larger percentage. Meanwhile, the ones that are disadvantaged begin to shrink. Adaptations eventually are what is formed by these advantages that get explored as these animals evolve. Things like camouflage with Arctic foxes are a great example of an adaptation that is a result of natural selection. Being really fast, I think cheetahs can run like 70 miles per hour. That is an advantage they developed slowly over time to be able to chase some of the fastest animals in um, in Africa. Other patterns as camouflage also exist, like penguins. Penguins have the dark part of their backs, but a lighter underbelly. You'll see a lot of marine creatures have this coloration scheme because of the way the water works. If you are below the penguin and you look up, you see the sky. You see the sunlight in the sky through the water. It's better to have a lighter belly so you can blend in with the lighter coloration of the ocean above you. But if you look down on a penguin, you see the dark depths of the water, and that's why the darker coloration is better for them, because it helps them blend in a bit better. Like even looking at the penguin that's a little bit further away, this penguin starts to be a little harder to see in the water and more difficult to target as a predator. But natural selection is not the only type of selection that can cause evolution. Um, Natural selection, once again, is an important factor, and I have it represented here just to kind of give another another opportunity to read it and look at how it works. But natural selection, once again, is a selective force that takes place due to an individual's fitness to survive, environmental factors, or other species hunting them, or some of their it's essentially natural selection. If you're bad at it, you kind of die. That's the kind of idea of a natural selection. Other types of selection include sexual selection. Sexual selection, it depends on an individual's ability to attract mates. Uh, Basically saying if you can attract more mates and have more children, you're more successful, so the genes that you have, the attractive genes, get passed on in greater frequency. Meanwhile, unattractive genes get passed on a little bit less. You see this in other species happening a lot. One example being birds of paradise. All three of these things, and yes, this one here is a bird, are birds that live on an island where there's not a lot of predators for them. And because there's no predators, they don't have to worry about being camouflaged. In fact, the strongest element that they need to be able to reproduce is just simply how attractive they are. So being very colorful or developing these elaborate displays and dances become the biggest driving factor in their changing over generations. Um, the final type of selection we'll see is artificial selection. Artificial selection is when people do the selecting. We choose the trait that we want to see more of, and we choose the traits we want to see less of. And you'll see this happen in a lot of animals that have breeds. Things like dogs or cows are great examples of species that have been greatly affected by artificial selection, where we've seen people take a dog or a wolf and decide, I want this dog to be big, be good at protecting me. So they breed the biggest of the dogs they have, and eventually come to the point where they get a Great Dane or a Mastiff. Other people want dogs that are good at following scents, so they breed the best dogs at smelling, and they get bloodhounds. Some people want dogs that are better at hunting or going into foxholes, so they breed the dogs that are the best at that, and they wind up with terriers. And then some people want dogs for companions that maybe don't want super big dogs, so then we wind up with the toy and miniature breeds. You see the same thing in cows, where we see a lot of breeds of cows that specialize in producing milk, the dairy cows. And then we also see breeds of cows like Angus cows that are better at having lots of meat on them for us to eat. So these breeds are a really big indicator that it is something that has experienced artificial selection. Um, I want to kind of bring about a connection here between physics and evolution. The different types of selection act in a similar way to forces in physics. They have a direction. They're pushing towards a trait and away from another trait. Um, and these forces, they arise when a factor changes how well a species survives and reproduces. A factor which increases the odds of survival of reproduction will become more common over generations because that force is pushing towards that trait or that factor or that variation. Inversely or oppositely, factors or variations or traits that cause animals to have a disadvantage will become less common, even sometimes disappearing. And just as in physics, it's possible for a species to fall into a state of equilibrium. Um, this occurs when the evolutionary forces aren't really pushing in a direction and everything's kind of balanced out. And you'll see some species stay the same for very long periods of time. Species like sharks and crocodiles have remained the same from the time of the dinosaurs. So equilibrium does happen in species. And our final slide is about what happens during selection. So when we do have some kind of selective forces, whether it be natural or sexual, we can get something along the lines, well, there can be a couple different results of that. And then it's a little confusing because all three of these things are called selection too, but they are indeed effects of selection. Our first thing is directional selection. This occurs when we have basically one force that is pushing towards one extreme of traits and away from another. And one good example of this are the pepper moths. You might have heard about these in middle school, where these pepper moths are originally supposed to be white with this black speckled coloration. They're supposed to blend in with birch trees that have that white with black speckled bark. But during the Industrial Revolution in England, all the soot that got put into the air from the factories stained the birch trees black. And now these pepper moths that are white stick out really badly. Fortunately, the pepper moths have a different variation, this darker variation, which would be picked off pretty quickly by birds. But because of the trees getting stained dark, all these white moths were getting killed by the birds, but the black moths were surviving. So we saw in a few generations, the pepper moths switch coloration from the white with the black speckles to the dark gray coloration because it was better. Normalizing selection occurs when we have two forces that are opposing each other and pushing towards the center, the normal part of what can be possible in a trait. Making the average become more common and the extremes become less common. We see this a lot in burst sizes in humans. Having a large baby is good because the baby's healthy. It's not going to get as many diseases and possibly die in infancy. However, having a small baby is also good for the mother. It's easier to birth that baby. And if the mother has a better chance of surviving childbirth, well, then the baby has a better chance of surviving too. And because these two forces are contradicting each other, it drives the average baby sizes to the most average, like the in-between weights, because then you have the best of both worlds. It's easier for the mother to survive giving birth to an average-sized baby, and the average-sized baby is still pretty healthy enough to survive infancy. So that is normalizing selection. And our final type is disruptive selection, which is the exact opposite of normalizing selection. We still have two forces, but instead of pushing towards each other, they're pulling away from each other. And what this does is it makes that average part of the trait less common, but the extremes become more common. We saw this with the Darwin's finches on the Galapagos Islands, where the middle beak right here, it was kind of good at eating seeds, it was kind of good at catching insects, but it could be improved upon. The biggest beak sizes were best for seeds, and the smallest beak sizes were best for catching insects. So we saw that middle beak size began to disappear. Meanwhile, the more robust and the smaller ones became more common because they were advantaged. But from here on, guys, you should be able to look at the natural selection quiz. So until next time, give it your best shot. If you have any questions, give me a shout.